When we first drove the Tata Punch, we were mighty impressed. In fact, Anirudh just couldn't stop talking about how well packaged this subcompact SUV is. But at that time, the pricing for the Punch wasn't out, and that is a very crucial part when you are evaluating the car. But today, that has changed. Pricing for the Punch is out, and that allows us to put it under the scanner with a fresher perspective. Does it really carve a segment of its own? Sure, it plugs the gap between a hatchback and a compact SUV, but today, we've assembled both ends of the spectrum. So on the hatchback side of things, I've got the Ignis, Maruti's premium hatchback that also benefits from a lot of SUV-derived styling elements. And on the other side is the Nissan Magnite, which is one of India's most affordable compact SUVs. Now, how does the Punch fare against both of these vehicles is what we are going to find out in today's video. Now, before we go ahead, make sure you give us a like, subscribe to the Evo India channel, and let us know in the comments which of these three vehicles is your pick. Now let's talk about styling and dimensions, and let's talk about the Tata Punch, which is the newest kid on the block. Now this is a very handsome looking car, there is no denying that. But what differentiates it from the rest of the compact SUVs is one, the length. Now while those vehicles sit just under 4 meters, this is 3.8 meters long, which is a shy bit smaller than the rest of the cars, but it does get the height. It is in fact the tallest car of the all that we've assembled here on test. It also gets 190 mm of ground clearance and 16-inch wheels that give it a very upright driving stance. You see the upright pillars, there's a roof rail on top, and all of it combined makes it look very SUV-ish. Lots of elements here that would remind you that this belongs to the Tata family. So the front, that is hugely inspired by the Harrier. You've got the split lighting setup, and it all looks very well put together. Now, how do those dimensions on the outside translate to the inside? Well, let's first start with the Tata Punch. Now, talking about the seat, it is on the firmer side, that is for sure, but then there is plenty of support from the seat itself. Also, plenty of seat adjustments, so you can sit yourself nice and low, or you can sit yourself a little high, which allows a very good view through this large windscreen, and you can see the edges of the bonnet, which means you can place this car very confidently in traffic. Now, that sort of commanding driving position is something that people expect from an SUV, and that the Punch delivers. Now let's also quickly glance on the kit that the Punch packs in, and there is plenty. The Punch again puts up a huge surprise because there is just so much on offer. You've got automatic headlamps, automatic wiper, there's the auto start stop function, the first on any Tata. Then there is this 7-inch infotainment system that is plucked from the Altros. In fact, a lot of things here have been picked from the Altros, and no, that is not a bad thing. So you've got this lovely leather-wrapped steering wheel. You've also got that instrument cluster, the semi-digital instrument cluster with a 7-inch display, lots of information on offer, and it is all very well put together. You've also got an automatic climate control, lots of places to put your knickknacks, and lots of cubby holes as well. So in general, this is a very easy car to live with. What I also love is the choice of materials. Very interesting textures here on the dashboard, and in all, it feels quite plush. It is quite an interesting cabin. Although it's very neat, it is still very attractive. Now, although the Punch does have the highest power on paper, that is if you are comparing the naturally aspirated variants of all three cars that we have on test today, it still does not translate to the most exciting driving dynamics, and that is largely due to the weight. But having said that, it is still adequate, it is plentiful. Us enthusiasts obviously will expect a lot more grunt from the engine, but for the normal consumer out there, I don't see how they would be complaining, because you put your foot down, and although the power delivery is linear, it still gets along just fine. Now what the Punch also gets are two driving modes. You've got the default mode, which is the city, which is the higher performance mode of the two. You also have the eco mode, which can be used on the highways once you've attained those cruising speeds and just want to continue with that. But for your normal city commute, it's best that you leave it in the city mode. Now, while the engine might not be exciting, Tata has definitely made it a lot more refined. Sure, you can hear it inside the cabin, but for a 3-cylinder engine, and even going by Tata's standards, they have contained the vibrations to a large extent, and that sure is very impressive. It makes the overall driving experience a lot more pleasant. Now let's talk about the transmission. What I'm driving here is the AMT variant of the Tata Punch. Yes, it is the AMT, and yes, it does come with the drawbacks of an AMT, which means that there is that head toss effect every time the car wants to shift up or down. Also, the shifts on the Tata Punch, they are not quite as intuitive. So every time you want to overtake or every time you need that sudden burst of power, you will have to plan those moves. And it's best that you shift it into manual mode and take manual control of the car. Or else, you could just buy yourself a manual, which is at least a 60,000 rupee cheaper deal. It's quite easy to use. The clutch, it's quite light. We got a chance to sample it during our first drive review. It came across as a better suited gearbox for enthusiasts like us. You can take more control of the car and you can really extract a lot more from that engine. Find yourself a good section, and this steering wheel, which is quite light to use in the city, adds up that weight as you pick up speed, and it is quite a fun car to drive. And this being an SUV, you would not expect such an attribute to be associated with a car like this, but it is just one of the best cars that we have here today out on our test. And it's not just the steering feedback, the suspension. It keeps working quietly in the background and it feels like a much bigger car. It's very confident. It takes up potholes, it takes up undulations very well. No thuds are passed into the cabin, no noise is passed into the cabin. Everything is just working in the background to keep this a very calm and composed place. So the driving experience is good. The handling manners are quite good, and that remains constant even when the car has a full load. Alright, the engine isn't the most powerful, it doesn't feel most exciting, but it is still adequate, and overall, for the typical customer, this does feel like a much more expensive car. And that I'm sure a lot of you are going to appreciate. Also, special mention to the sound system in the Tata Punch. The Harman-tuned 6-speaker setup is just fantastic. It's such an enjoyable experience when you're out on a long drive, listening to your favorite tunes. It just is a very rewarding experience. The Punch also offers generous space for the rear occupants. The flat bench and the near flat floor makes it convenient to seat 3 abreast. However, limited shoulder room might hamper long hours for 3 passengers. 2 have more than enough space, plenty of knee room and good headroom too. Worth noticing, no rear AC vents and no charging points in the back. Now let's talk about the Nissan Magnite, which fits itself within the traditional compact SUV dimensions. So in terms of the length, it sits at 3994 millimeters, which is the same, pretty much the same dimension that the rest of the compact SUVs have. Also, on our test today, it is the longest and it is the widest, which translates to better usable space on the inside. Now we'll come to that a little later in this video. In terms of the ground clearance, the Nissan Magnite has 205 millimeters of that, which is 15 millimeters more than the Tata Punch, and that does make a difference. Now, the Punch is slightly taller than the Magnite, but that doesn't make a difference in terms of the overall proportions that the Magnite has to offer. It looks bigger, especially with the styling that it has. You know, it's very bold, lots of sharp cuts and creases, and this does grab a lot of eyeballs when it is rolling down the road. Alright then, how does the biggest car of the lot drive and handle? The Nissan Magnite. Let's begin with the driving position first. Again, the seats, just like the Punch, are on the firmer side, but then again, they offer good support. Even for the side bolsters, it is adequate, and they really do help in placing myself quite comfortably in the seat. They grab me quite well. The dashboard though, it is set quite high, and no matter how high you are sat, you still can't see the edges of the molded. But still, it is a fairly easy car to navigate in the city, and that is primarily due to the high driving stance of it. There is a good view around through all the glass area. The pillars, they don't obstruct my vision, and overall, I feel that the Magnite feels quite confident, and that is also due to its large proportions and larger footprint. Now, in terms of the features, so the Nissan Magnite misses out on a few key things that the Punch gets, for instance, automatic headlamps and automatic wipers, but that is alright because what this gets is a 360-degree camera. So 4 cameras placed around the car, and they really do help park this car in tight spaces. Another really cool feature is wireless Android Auto and Apple CarPlay and wireless charging as well. So overall, this is again a very usable and a very friendly car for your day-to-day commute. I also like how the dashboard is slightly inclined towards the driver. It makes using the interface that much more easier. Now, in terms of the space on offer, the Nissan Magnite is the biggest car of the lot, and it does translate to a larger cabin on the inside. So it's wider, it's also larger, it's roomier for the rear occupants, they have more knee room, more headroom, and yes, it doesn't get a flat floor on the rear like the Punch, but it does benefit from AC vents and a USB charging. So it's a better experience, more suited towards long distance traveling for the rear passengers and for the front ones as well. And just like the Tata Punch, a lot of interesting materials used on the inside. For instance, this denim finished fabric on the door cards and the central armrest, it makes the cabin feel that much more premium. And overall, the general experience for the kind of car that the Magnite is, for what it costs, there is a lot going for this compact SUV. You've got space, you've got kit on offer, you've got some segment first features, and it is quite a pleasant car to drive around as well. Now, speaking about driving, what powers this Magnite is a 1-liter turbocharged engine that's paired with a CVT transmission. I think this is the best powertrain option to have on the Magnite. But if you are comparing a variant next to the Punch, it has to be the 1-liter naturally aspirated, and unfortunately that engine doesn't get an automatic transmission. Also, that 1-liter naturally aspirated engine isn't the most powerful. In fact, it's the least powerful of the engines that we have today, and it is, although refined, it is quite noisy. Even at idle, you can hear the engine into the cabin, and as you gain speed, or if you strain the engine, you can really feel it inside the cabin. It feels a little harsh, and you would restrain yourself from doing that very often. Now, the other concern that you might find with the Nissan Magnite is the directness of the steering wheel. It doesn't feel as communicative as the steering setup of the Tata Punch. Also, it is on the heavier side, so maneuvering through the city could be a little demanding task as compared to the Punch or even the Ignis, which has a lighter setup of all of the 3 cars that we have on the test. But having said that, it isn't a deal breaker by any sorts. Now let's talk about the ride on the Nissan Magnite. The suspension is set up in a very good way to absorb your typical undulations and your small potholes, but the bigger ones and the bigger jolts are definitely passed into the cabin. And not just that, they also unsettle the car a fair bit. It's definitely not as impressive as a Tata Punch. That is just exceptionally good, but the Nissan Magnite, even when compared to the other compact SUVs in its segment, does a fairly good job. Now, to sum it up fair and square, the Nissan Magnite, being a bigger car, obviously has better space on the inside when you compare it with the Tata Punch. It also has a few more premium features. But having said that, it also has its drawbacks. The 1-liter naturally aspirated engine, for one, does not have an automatic transmission, and second, is quite underpowered. It's also quite noisy in its operation. Now let's talk about the styling elements of the Ignis. And if you're wondering why we've got this car here and not the Swift, it's mainly because of the SUV-derived elements here that make it look this funky. So obviously, you've got this bold bumper with a 4 bash plate, and that is true for the rear one as well. It's got cladding throughout its length and width, and it's also got roof rails. In all, it's got that upright stance, very bold to look at. In terms of the dimensions, the ground clearance is 180 millimeters, and even the rest of the car is slightly smaller than the Punch. But having said that, it is still very bold, and it sets itself apart from the rest of the hatchback that there is. Alright, now having driven the 2 other larger cars, I am now driving the Maruti Suzuki Ignis, and there's just something special about this car. Maybe it's its compact dimensions. Yes, it is the smallest of the lot, but that makes it that much more nimble and that much more enjoyable, especially when you are on a tight section of road like this. Now I also have to say the Ignis, although it lacks under-thigh support, the seats, they are quite good, and for the average Indian out there, they are quite supportive. The driving position, it is very engaging. Very nice to see analog meters. There's an analog RPM meter and an analog speed readout. It is just such an engaging drive. And the engine, that K-Series 1.2 liter 4-cylinder engine, it is 1 bhp down on power when compared to the Punch, but this is that much more lighter, and it makes driving such a special occasion, even in this naturally aspirated state of tune. The engine, it likes to be revved. It wants you to extract the most power out of it, unlike the Punch, which feels a lot more restrained. And the faster you drive it, the better it gets. And complementing the engine is this slick shifting 5-speed gearbox. The gear slotting is accurate. The clutch, that is light. Quick shifting, no problem. You can really build up to good speeds, change through gears. It's just such an involving and such a rewarding experience. Brilliant. Now the only thing that lets down the driving experience is the steering wheel. The Punch has the best steering setup, and on the Ignis, yes, it is light, which means it is easy to use when you're in the city, but it feels largely disconnected. Now talking about the features, the Ignis, it being a hatchback, it gets quite basic features, especially when you compare it with the Nissan Magnite. Now you only have an automatic aircon control and the basic stuff in here. No automatic headlamps, no automatic wipers, just a basic setup. Obviously you get this touchscreen with the latest connectivity options, and this updated smart suite by Maruti is definitely a lot more better and a lot more intuitive than the generation that it replaces. What I also love about the Ignis is the design of this cabin. It's very funky. I absolutely love this rotary style aircon unit. Lots of interesting touches here, like this body colored panel, this central console, lots of cubby holes. And yes, the way I look at it, just a single person sitting in a car, it has enough space, but it is a little concerning, especially if you have a family of 4. Space in the back, that is extremely limited. I am just over 6 feet tall. This is my preferred driving position, and there is almost no space left for someone to sit behind me. Now that is quite concerning. And in addition to the smaller capacity that we have inside the cabin, the Ignis also has the smallest boot of the lot here, which means that this car is quite limited in its application. Having 4 people sit here with the luggage in the boot is quite a task, so this isn't as suited as the others here for long distance road trips. Also, the suspension, it has lesser travel. The ground clearance, it is a lot lesser than the Magnite and lesser than the Punch as well. So although that means that this rides better and it is quite enjoyable, for those long distance trips where you encounter variations of terrains, those 2 vehicles are better suited. This is quite a good city runabout. It is a very enjoyable car to just quickly pick the keys to and head to the grocery shop and back. You know, the compact dimensions, you don't have to worry about parking it. You don't even need a 360 camera. That compactness is something that I absolutely love. Now, a lot of customers are now paying attention to the safety of the cars that they drive. And the Tata Punch, well, it's making big headlines with that 5-star GNCAP rating. It is India's safest cars of all the cars that have been tested by GNCAP, and that is in fact a commendable job. Even the Magnite, now it hasn't been tested by GNCAP, but then in the ASEAN crash testing, it has secured 4 stars, which is again decent enough for a car of its size. Now the Ignis hasn't been crash tested by GNCAP or ASEAN, but the Maruti Suzuki Swift that shares the platform with the Ignis, the hardtech platform, has been crash tested and it has scored 2 stars, which isn't as impressive as the 5 stars that the Punch scores. Having said that, the Ignis, it gets you the basic safety features. So you have 2 airbags and you've got the electronic aids like ABS and EBD and stuff like that. But the Punch is that much more reassuring when it comes to safety of yourself and the occupants in the car. Now, having driven all three cars throughout the day, what have we come to establish? Well, if you're after SUV credentials, I strongly recommend that you write off the Suzuki Ignis. Now, this is a fun-to-drive hatchback, but that's what it is. It is in all essence a hatchback. It comes with a lot of limitations, especially with the space on the inside, the ground clearance, and even the ride. It isn't as plush or as giving as these two that we have here. That leaves us with the Nissan Magnite and the Tata Punch, both of which have overlapping prices across variants and specs. The Nissan Magnite undercuts the Tata Punch if you opt for the naturally aspirated engine. However, there is no automatic gearbox with the NatAsp and the engine feels strained and underpowered. Still, it offers that sense of owning a bigger car, and that also means more usable space on the inside. With the Magnite, you also have the option of upgrading to the turbocharged engine with the CVT transmission, a more powerful powertrain with a smoother gearbox. If frequent highway trips with a full load is your thing, the Magnite feels best suited for the task. And its turbocharged variant is only a couple thousands more than the fully loaded top-spec Tata Punch. The Tata Punch, as the brand claims, has the agility of a hatchback with the credentials of an SUV. It is compact yet spacious, making it very friendly for your day-to-day city use. The 190mm ground clearance does lend it some SUV credentials. It is adequately powerful, comes with plenty of features, and is also backed with a 5-star GNCAP safety rating. If I were to pick one just by the looks, it has to be the Punch. It is handsome, and that Harrier-derived face is very imposing. Tata is also offering customization options at manufacturer level, allowing you to spec a mid-variant with the sorts of features that you'd like. If you are on a budget and don't really need the biggest car in the parking lot, the Punch does tick a lot of right boxes and makes for a very sensible buy. But still, let us know in the comments which one would you pick of the three.